All right, so are you ready to like jump into a time capsule with us today?
Ooh, a time capsule.
Yeah,
I'm ready.
because we're going to be looking at this list
Okay.
from the top10s.com.
Right.
It's called Worst Things in People of the 2020s Decade.
Okay. Interesting.
So this list is basically like just a snapshot
Okay.
of like what was annoying people back in the early 2020s.
Gotcha.
And let me tell you, some of the entries are pretty intense.
I bet.
Yeah.
It's interesting, though, like you said, it's not just like a
Yeah.
random collection of dislikes.
Yeah.
Like you can actually see some pretty clear themes emerging.
Yeah.
Like things like, political divisions, anxieties about like all the tech advancements, even generational clashes over like what's considered funny or cool.
Yeah.
It's like a cultural seismograph,
Right?
capturing all those like tremors of frustration and change.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's amazing how this list
Yeah.
reveals so much about like the worries and obsessions of that era.
It is.
It's everything from Donald Trump, who
Right.
actually shows up twice on the list
Wow.
to the COVID-19 pandemic,
Right.
to believe it or not,
Okay.
the Skibidi toilet.
Oh, yeah, the Skibidi toilet.
And
Yeah, I remember that.
talk about a mixed bag of anxieties.
Yeah, that's quite the combination.
It is.
It's fascinating, though, how seemingly, like, unrelated things,
Yeah.
like a political figure and a bizarre internet trend
Right.
are actually, like, connected by this undercurrent of unease
Right.
that was running through, like, the early 2020s.
Totally. And speaking of like prominent figures on this list,
Yeah,
Donald Trump,
okay.
the user lists him once in general,
Uh-huh.
and then again specifically for the assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania.
Interesting.
What do you make of that?
Well, it definitely underscores just how dominant
Yeah.
Trump was in the public consciousness back then. I
Right.
mean, whether people loved him or hated him, he was a constant topic of conversation.
Yeah.
But the fact that the assassination attempt is listed separately
Right.
is particularly intriguing.
Yeah.
It suggests that the user might believe this event
Uh-huh.
actually like played a role in shaping public opinion,
Wow.
perhaps even influencing the outcome of the 2020 election.
You're right. It really makes you wonder how that event
Yeah,
might have shifted perceptions,
totally.
even subconsciously for some voters.
Uh-huh.
Now, speaking of figures who spark strong reactions,
Okay.
we have to talk about Elon Musk.
Oh, right.
This list absolutely roasts him.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
The user really goes after his management of Twitter,
Uh-huh.
or X as it's now known,
Right.
and even throws in some speculation about Musk's political ambitions.
Interesting.
What do you think is driving such a strong negative reaction?
Well, if you look at the user's specific words,
Yeah.
like, there's a real sense of betrayal there.
Yeah.
Almost like they feel personally let down by Musk's decisions.
Interesting.
They're not just, like, critiquing his business moves.
Uh-huh.
They're lamenting the loss of what Twitter used to be.
Yeah.
Remember, this was a time when people were already feeling uneasy about the power of big tech.
Uh-huh.
And seeing someone like Musk, who was once considered a visionary,
Right.
make these controversial changes probably just amplified those anxieties.
It's almost like they're watching like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
downfall of an icon in real time,
Right.
and it's unsettling.
It is unsettling to see that happen.
It's interesting, too, because they also include Mark Zuckerberg on this list,
Oh, yeah.
who, while not receiving as much vitriol as Musk,
Right.
is still clearly seen as like a negative force.
Right. And it speaks to like a broader distrust of these tech giants
Yeah.
that was brewing at the time.
Uh-huh.
People were starting to become more aware of how much data these companies were collecting.
Right. Yeah.
And there was a growing concern about how that data might be used.
Right.
So figures like Zuckerberg and Musk
Yeah.
became almost symbolic of this larger unease about the role of technology in our lives.
Like, they're the poster children for everything people were starting to fear about the tech world.
Exactly.
Now let's shift gears a bit
Okay.
and talk about some of the cultural trends that made the list.
All right.
The user seems particularly annoyed by TikTok,
Uh-huh.
even using the word cringe to describe it.
Cringe. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a perfect example of the generational divide we were talking about earlier.
Right.
The word cringe itself was primarily used by Gen Z at the time
Yeah.
to describe anything they perceived as trying too hard
Right.
or out of touch.
Yeah.
Often things that older generations found amusing or nostalgic.
Uh-huh.
So the fact that this user is using it to describe TikTok
Right.
suggests a real clash in what each generation finds
Yeah.
entertaining and relatable.
And it's not just about different tastes, right?
Right.
It's almost like they're feeling alienated
Yeah.
by how quickly online culture is changing.
Totally.
How these new trends are becoming dominant.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that feeling of alienation
Mhm.
is amplified when you consider how language itself was changing at the time.
Yeah.
This user also goes on a rant about the slang term
Oh, yeah?
Reels. Even suggesting a pretty hilarious way to shut down anyone who uses it.
Oh, yeah. I remember that part.
Yeah.
It's like they're trying to fight back against this invasion of new slang with humor,
Right.
which is actually pretty clever.
It is pretty clever.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is that it shows how even something
Yeah.
as seemingly trivial as a slang term
Uh-huh.
can become a battleground for these larger anxieties about generational shifts and cultural change. It's like they're trying to reclaim a sense of ownership over language itself.
It's amazing how these seemingly small things
I mean,
can tap into such deep-seated anxieties.
right.
And speaking of things that are hard to understand,
Okay.
there's also the Skibidi toilet.
The Skibidi toilet.
The user seems completely baffled by this trend,
Yeah.
which, to be fair,
Right.
is pretty understandable.
Understandable, yeah.
Yeah.
This, again, points to that generational divide in humor.
Uh-huh.
What might seem absurd and nonsensical to one generation
Right.
can be a source of endless amusement for another.
Yeah.
It speaks to the constantly evolving nature of humor
Yeah.
and how it can be such a powerful marker of cultural identity.
So we've got this collision of anxieties.
We do.
Politics, technology,
Yeah.
and now even the things we find funny.
It's a lot to process.
It's like everything is in flux,
Uh-huh.
and people are struggling to keep up.
Absolutely. This list really captures
Yeah.
that feeling of being caught in the whirlwind of change.
Right.
It's like a snapshot of a society in transition,
Totally.
trying to make sense of a world that's rapidly shifting around them.
And it's not just about trends and technology, right?
Right.
There are some pretty heavy political events on this list as well.
Okay.
Like the George Floyd protests.
Yeah, the inclusion of the George Floyd protests really underscores
Mhm.
the social, political upheaval that was happening in
Yeah.
the early 2020s.
Yeah.
This was a period of intense reckoning with issues of race policing and systemic injustice.
Right.
And the protests were a powerful expression
Yeah.
of the frustrations and anger that many people were feeling.
It was definitely a pivotal moment in our history.
It was.
And it's clear that it left a lasting impact
Absolutely.
of those who lived through it.
It did.
And speaking of impactful figures,
Yeah.
the list also includes a whole roster
Okay.
of political heavyweights from both sides of the aisle.
Right.
We're talking about J.D. Vance, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Tucker Carlson,
Wow.
Don Lemon, Donald Trump Jr.,
Okay.
and even Stephen Colbert.
That's quite the list.
It's like a who's who of polarizing personality.
And that's exactly the point. The
Mhm.
inclusion of such a diverse range of figures,
Right.
many of whom hold diametrically opposed views,
Yeah.
really highlights the intensely polarized political climate of that era.
Right.
The user isn't simply expressing dislike for individuals.
Mhm.
They're reflecting the deep partisan divisions that were tearing society apart.
It's like a microcosm of the political battlefield that was playing out in the media, online, and even within families.
It really was.
And it's interesting how this list jumps back and forth
Yeah.
between these weighty political issues
Mm-hmm.
and more lighthearted cultural trends.
Right.
It really paints a picture of a society
Yeah.
that tried to process a lot all at once.
Exactly. It's a reminder that these anxieties weren't happening in isolation.
Yeah.
They were all intertwined, feeding off of each other.
Right.
And creating this overall sense of unease and uncertainty.
And amidst all this political and social turmoil,
Okay.
the user also finds time to critique some pop cultural figures.
Oh, right.
I have some harsh words for the animated show Has Been Hotel.
Has Been Hotel.
Yeah, calling it out for relying on shock value over substance.
This is interesting because it shows that even within the realm of entertainment,
Yeah.
people were yearning for something more meaningful,
Uh-huh.
something that went beyond surface-level provocation.
Yeah.
The user isn't just looking for mindless entertainment.
Right.
They're seeking out content that engages with deeper issues and values.
It's like they're craving authenticity and substance
Yeah,
in a world that feels increasingly superficial.
absolutely.
And then there's Sean Combs, a.k.a. P. Diddy,
Okay.
who makes the list,
Uh-huh.
with the user expressing a desire for legal consequences for him and his associates.
Wow, that's a pretty strong statement.
Yeah, what do you make of that?
Well, this entry is particularly intriguing
Okay.
because it raises a lot of questions.
Yep.
It suggests that the user is aware of some controversies
Right.
or allegations surrounding Combs and his business dealings,
Uh-huh.
and they believe there should be accountability for any potential wrongdoing.
Yeah,
It's a reminder that even those in the entertainment industry
right.
aren't immune to public scrutiny or calls for justice.
It's like they're holding these figures to a higher standard.
Yeah.
Perhaps because they see them as having a greater influence over society.
Right.
And finally,
Yeah.
we have a few newcomers,
Right.
contenders to keep an eye on.
Okay.
Rodney Radke,
Uh-huh.
Drake,
Okay.
and Mr. Beast.
This is fascinating because it's almost like
Yeah.
the user is predicting who might end up on a future worst of list.
Right.
It prompts us to consider what qualities or actions might have led to their inclusion
Right.
and how their influence might have evolved
Right.
in the years since this list was created.
It's like they're pointing to some emerging cultural forces
Exactly.
that they see as potentially problematic or influential, whether for better or for worse.
Right.
It's a reminder that culture is always in flux.
It is.
And new figures are constantly rising and falling in prominence.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this deep dive so engaging.
Yeah.
It's not just a static list of dislikes.
Right.
It's a dynamic snapshot of a culture in motion,
Totally.
grappling with change and trying to define its values in a rapidly evolving world.
It is. It's wild to think about, like, how all these threads, politics, pop culture, tech, they're all woven together in this tapestry of discontent.
They are.
Yeah.
What's really striking to me is how the list captures the anxieties surrounding technology.
Right.
Remember the early 2020s was a period of like rapid digital advancement. Think about like the rise of social media, the increasing reliance on smartphones, the growing influence of algorithms.
Yeah.
These changes were happening so fast that it's no wonder people were feeling a bit overwhelmed.
Right. And it wasn't just the pace of change, right?
Yeah.
It was also like the uncertainty about what these changes meant for our lives, our privacy, for our future.
Right.
The criticisms leveled at Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, for example, go beyond just like their personal actions.
I think so.
They tap into a larger fear about like the power these tech giants wield.
Absolutely. These individuals became almost symbolic of this larger unease about the role of technology in our lives.
Yeah.
People were starting to ask like tough questions about data privacy, algorithmic bias, the spread of misinformation.
Yeah.
And those questions are still relevant today.
They are.
Perhaps even more so.
It's like this list is like a warning from the past.
Yeah.
Urging us to be more mindful of how we interact with technology.
Right.
And the power we give to these companies.
Absolutely. But it's not all doom and gloom, is it?
Right.
There's also a sense of humor running through this list.
Yeah.
A kind of wry observation of the absurdity of it all.
It's what makes it so relatable.
I agree.
The user isn't just ranting.
Right.
They're engaging with these issues in a way that's both critical and humorous.
Yeah.
Take, for example, their reaction to the slang term Riz.
Oh, yeah.
Their suggestion for shutting down anyone who uses it is pretty hilarious.
It is.
It shows that even in the face of all this change and uncertainty, people were still finding ways to laugh at themselves and the world around them.
Totally.
It's a reminder that humor can be a powerful coping mechanism.
It is a great coping mechanism.
A way of processing the anxieties of our time.
It's also a form of resistance in a way.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, by poking fun at these trends, they're reclaiming a sense of agency, showing that they're not simply passive consumers of culture, but active participants who can shape the conversation.
I like that humor as a form of resistance.
Yeah.
It's a subtle but powerful way of pushing back.
It is.
Against the things that feel overwhelming or out of control. So we've got this mix of anxiety, humor, and social commentary.
Okay.
But what does it all add up to?
Yeah.
What can we learn from this snapshot of public sentiment from the early 2020s?
Well, for one, it reminds us that history isn't just about big events and famous figures. It's also about the everyday experiences and concerns of ordinary people.
Yeah.
This list gives us a glimpse into the mindset of someone who is living through that time, grappling with the challenges and anxieties of that era.
It's like a window into the soul of the early 2020s.
Totally.
Revealing not just like the surface level trends, but also like the deeper anxieties that were shaping people's perceptions of the world.
Exactly. And by understanding those anxieties, we can gain a better understanding of the choices people made, the movements that gained traction, the cultural shifts that took place.
It's like a key to unlocking a deeper understanding of the past, and how it continues to shape our present.
Absolutely.
And speaking of the present, it's fascinating to think about how this list might compare to a similar list created today.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
What events or figures would dominate a worst of list for the current year?
Yeah. Have our anxieties shifted? Have new concerns emerged?
It's a question worth pondering.
It really makes you wonder what future historians will make of our current moment.
Right.
What trends will they see as significant? What anxieties will they identify as defining our era?
Yeah.
It's almost like a challenge to the listener, isn't it?
It is a challenge.
To take stock of our current cultural landscape and consider what we might add to our own worst of list.
And that's where the true value of this deep dive lies.
Right.
It's not just about passively consuming information.
Yeah.
It's about actively engaging with it.
Right.
Using it as a springboard for our own reflections and conversations.
So as we move into the final part of this deep dive,
okay,
I want to encourage you, the listener, to think about like your own experiences and observations.
Right.
What events or trends have shaped your perception of the last few years? What anxieties or frustrations would you include on your own personal worst list?
That's a good question.
And perhaps most importantly, what do those choices reveal about your own values and worldview?
It's a lot to think about.
Keep those questions in mind as we wrap up this exploration of the worst things in people of the 2020s decade. Yeah, it's interesting to think about how our own worst of lists, might reflect the anxieties and frustrations of our current moment, just like this list from 2020.
And while these lists might seem negative on the surface, they can actually be quite revealing.
Right.
They can highlight the things that we as a society are struggling with, the things that we're trying to make sense of.
So in a way, these worst of lists could be seen as a form of social commentary, even a call to action.
Absolutely. They can spark conversations, challenge assumptions, and even inspire change.
Right.
Think about it this way.
Yeah.
If enough people are expressing frustration about a particular issue, it's a sign that something needs to be addressed.
Right. It's like a collective venting session. But with the potential to lead to something more constructive?
Exactly. And it's important to remember that these lists are subjective.
Right.
What one person considers the worst might be seen as a positive development by someone else.
Totally.
That's the beauty of perspective.
And it's a reminder that even in a time of intense division and disagreement, there's still room for dialogue and understanding.
That's a crucial point. These lists can help us to see the world through different eyes, to understand where other people are coming from, even if we don't agree with their conclusions.
It's all about empathy, really.
It is.
Trying to understand the experiences and perspectives that have shaped other people's views, even if those views are different from our own.
And that's how we can start to bridge the divides that separate us, to find common ground, and to work towards solutions that benefit everyone.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into this fascinating list, I want to leave you with this thought.
All right.
Don't be afraid to engage with the things that make you uncomfortable, the things that challenge your assumptions, the things that make you question the world around you.
Because it's through those moments of discomfort, those moments of questioning, that we truly grow and learn.
And who knows, you might even discover something unexpected along the way.
Totally.
Even a new perspective on something you thought you already understood.
That's the beauty of the deep dive, isn't it?
It is.
It's a journey of discovery, a chance to explore new ideas and expand our understanding of the world.
So keep diving deep. Keep questioning. Keep learning.
Absolutely.
And most importantly, keep the conversation going.
Until next time, a 188.